Howdy, y'all. How's everybody? Good, good. I'm recovering from food poisoning that I gave to myself from yogurt that I made from my cow. So entirely my fault. Yeah, but dealing with life with a new cow and a new calf and everything. But today's lecture is super important. All right, so I want to start by talking about your podcast. We'll take 5 minutes or so in group. Yeah, so let's start with a quick review of what we did in Chapter 2, which was a lot, which I still haven't finished. But Chapter 2 I called Unmooring, which is that more permanent version of the anchor. And the main question of Chapter 2 is how do we know what we know, right? Know in quotation marks. So how do we know what we know? We started by looking at the word epistemology, episteme. What does our knowledge stand on, right? And philosophers are always looking for something real, something unchanging, something permanent, something that you can rely on. We want to build a whole system of philosophy on top of that thing that's never changing, right? Like a firm foundation building a house. Problem is, they just haven't found one, Yeah. So then a different way of going about it. We talked about Nicholas of Cusa, right? And we learn through comparative relation. So we know one thing. We experience something new, something we've never seen before, and then we compare it to things that we've seen before. And the key word there is archetypes, right? We learn an archetype, and then we experience something new, and then something new, right? And then we're always comparing it to those original archetypes, which helps us to understand prejudice, right? So then we learn about these original archetypes from people in our milieu, from our families and culture and society around us. Other people learn in other bubbles, and so we tend to understand the world in that light for that reason, because that's what anchors our knowledge, right? So the answer, what anchors our knowledge, a good answer would be archetypes. Then we talked about the relationship between this and evolution, right, which means unfolding, and I told that delightful story about, right, and family reunion and all that kind of stuff, and said that basically genetic inbreeding is not, ideal. It's to be avoided generally. Likewise, ideological inbreeding to be avoided, right? You need variety or diversity of ideas to help to control for bias or prejudice that's built into our learning through comparative relation. Then talk about 4 epistemologies, right? So what are the 4 epistemologies? 4 ways of knowing? Yeah? Intellectual. This order. Yep. Intellectual, rational, sensual, imaginative. We can go top to bottom or bottom to top, but the same order. And then these 4 epistemologies, or 4 ways of knowing, correspond to 4 ontologies, or ways of being. So then what are these 4 ways of being? Intellectual is really easy. That one is ideas, sometimes called forms. Usually philosophers call them forms, but Socrates called them ideas, so we'll just call them, I tend to call them both. Rational knowledge. How do we define rational knowledge? Right, exactly right. Anything that can be expressed in words or numbers, or anything that can be defined, right? Defined with words or numbers. If it can be defined in words or numbers, it's rational. If it can't, then it's just non-rational, right? I mean, can you describe the taste of ice cream? Kinda, but it's not the same as tasting ice cream, is it? Describing it, it's just not the same, right? Reading about sex in a book is different than, right? Yeah. Then sensual. How do we know sensual knowledge? Our senses. Yeah. So sensual ontology, it's the universe. It's literally the physical universe. Everything in the universe, all matter and energy fall here, right? So the material stuff, material universe, matter and energy. The simplest thing would be to say sensual objects, right? Objects of sense. Anything that you can see, anything that you can taste, anything that you can hear, anything you can feel, anything you can smell is a thing that you can do all of those things to, right? So a sensual object. So pretty much everything falls under, like the material universe is there. Imaginative. So the things that we know with our imagination are images. The two most important words, one of them I haven't given you, images and shadows. We won't talk about shadows until we get to chapter 8. Then we'll talk a lot more about the distinction between images and shadows. We know images and shadows through our imagination. We experience them through our imagination. But they're really quite different. All the rest of these, aren't so different. But these two are really two different things. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So, right, I always put a line between them. So we have images. On this side, we have images and dreams and memories. I kind of, think those are all a little bit different. And by images, we don't just mean visual images, right? But just anything in your imagination. So dreams and memories, anything that's in your imagination, anything you can see in your head, they exist, right? So like maybe you have a pet that died when you were young, right? Maybe you had a dog or a cat or something that you had when you were young. And
when I was a kid, I had a dog named Bean.
And that cat or dog, doesn't exist anymore as something that you can see or pet or cuddle with, right? But it still exists as a memory.
I miss my dead cat.
Right? It's not non-existent anymore. It just doesn't exist in this way, but it still exists in this way. If you could describe it, tell its name or describe it, right, then it would exist this way. Maybe you could write a biography of your cat or dog or hamster or whatever, right?
When I was a boy, I had a dog named Freddie.
So that would fall, and so it would still exist. It would exist as a rational account or as a story or something like that. Or if you're like an author, a creative writer, right, and you create a story, maybe you create a character.
My name is imaginary friend.
Right, that would fall here and here, right? Maybe to some sense here, but here and here, but not here, right? Like Harry Potter.
Harry Potter?
Harry Potter doesn't exist as a sensual object, right? Daniel Radcliffe does.
Daniel Radcliffe! I am Daniel Radcliffe. Hello!
Right, but not Harry Potter. And so Harry Potter exists as something that is in our imagination because J.K. Rowling, right, described Harry Potter and the biography and all that kind of stuff, right? So Harry Potter exists.
Harry Potter, if he existed.
Don't say Harry Potter doesn't exist, right? Harry Potter exists as a rational entity and as an imaginative entity, images, dreams, all those kind of things, not as a thing in the material universe. Make sense?
I understand that perfectly.
Cool? Any questions?
I have no questions.
Okay. We'll come back to this when we get to chapter 7, which is on ontology.
That'll be about as much fun as a lecture on ontological empiricism.
So everything fits together. Okay. Now let's move to formal ontological analysis. That's what we did the other day, right, with Martin Luther King. It's not like a requirement, but it would be cool to do a formal ontological analysis in your podcast, right? If you were interested in that and you guys could, you don't even have to do it all by yourself, right? I could say, hey, I want to do a formal ontological analysis of freedom or something like that, right? And then you could go through how does freedom exist as an idea? How do we define it? What does freedom look like in the world? Or what does its opposite look like? Or what can we imagine freedom? That kind of stuff, right? That would be a cool thing. All right. Chaturpad. This will help you understand it, I'm sure. It's just a flex. Chatur meaning four, and pad meaning foot. Chaturpad meaning 4 foot, or the four quarters, 4 types, 4 feet. The 4 states of consciousness. There are states of conscious awareness. So 4 states of conscious awareness. Let me start by just giving them to you. Enlightenment, waking state, dream state, and deep sleep. Enlightenment
It's a state.
of total awareness.
We'll, get there eventually, hopefully. My goal is always to get everybody to be enlightened by the end of the semester, but certainly not there yet. Waking state and dream state, and deep sleep.
Into a deep, deep, deep sleep.
Let's start with deep sleep, because deep sleep is, I think, the easiest to understand. Deep sleep, when you're in a state of deep sleep, what's going on in your head? Literally nothing, right? It's kind of what deep sleep is nothing is going on in your head.
Because there's nothing going on in his stupid little head.
You don't even know that you're you, right? You don't even know anything, right? You know nothing. You're unaware of anything around you. If you're not sleeping well, then maybe you're aware of things around you, right? But if you're in a state of deep sleep, then you're unaware of anything around you.
Totally
right?
unaware of his surroundings.
So this is a state of consciousness where you're not conscious of anything, right? So not conscious of anything. Not conscious of anything. All right, so we've got pretty clear distinctions between this one and this one. But these two we want to keep a little bit murky. So waking state. When we're in a waking state, like most of you are now, then you've got information coming in through your senses, right? And then these two chapters really run together. So like this is the bridge between the two. I'm kind of going to do both at the same time. Sorry, the food poisoning has like really affected my thinking, clouded my head. Let's think about how do we know what we know, right? Well, how do we experience the waking state or the dream state? When you're awake and alert, right, then light comes from the light bulbs, right? We could even go into more detail, right? You've got electricity coming through copper wires. They reach the light bulbs, which are a resistor. Then that slows down the electrical current, which causes a radiation event. So you've got photons that radiate from the fluorescent bulbs. Cool. Those light waves or photons comes and it bounces off of, let's just take something at random, about a playing die, right? That bounces off of the playing die. Some of the light is absorbed by the thing, right? Some of the light is absorbed by the object. And then some of the light bounces off of the object, right? And is reflected off of the object. It bounces off of the object and then goes into eyeballs, right? When it goes into your eyeballs, when you're awake, it goes into your eyeballs. And then, what do you have inside of your eyeballs? Did I do this on Monday? What's inside of your eyeballs that enables you to see? Yeah. Rods and cones. Yeah. And rods and cones, and they're of 3 different types for most people, right? Red, green, and blue. I don't have green, but RGB, right? RGB light. And so what happens is those photons bounce off of whatever it is. Let's say a playing die, right? Let's say we've got the sun, right? Light waves bounce off of this thing, and then they go into your eye. Then they go and they, it's electricity, right? It's photoelectronic electricity in the form of a light wave. And those light waves, they hit those rods and cones, and then it's electrical, right? So it causes them to vibrate, causes them to get excited, right? And so the red receptors get excited when there's red light, and the green get excited when there's green light, right? It's what it means to be a RGB receptor. And then when they get excited, what happens next? Everybody follow me so far? This is like critically important. Change happens right here, actually right there, right? What happens after this point? The light doesn't go into your brain. What happens at this point? Yeah.
It sends signals to your brain.
Well, yeah. What sends signals? Literally, what signals? How do the signals get there? Yes. So neurotransmitters, which travel along nerve cells, right? And so you've got dendrites and axons. You're studying all this stuff, right? Neuropsych. correct me if I misstep on anything. So electrical signals travel along those nerve cells, and then go, in the case of the eye, they go to your visual cortex. What is the visual cortex? What is a cortex? Okay, what's a cortex? Part of your brain. So that's the answer. It's like a region of your brain, right? So visual cortex is the part of your brain where you have visual, right? All these nerve cells, they go all over your brain, right? But they kind of centralized in that visual cortex, which, if I'm not mistaken, is at the back of the brain, like back here. Then what happens? If you see a playing die, light comes here, goes in, excites those, sends electrical signals back here. Then what does your brain do? What does your visual cortex do? Basically, it recreates this, right? It recreates an image, not in a literal sense, but your brain constructs an image of the world that it sees out there, right? And then so let's try this here. Let's all right, can everybody see the cup? Everybody see the thermos? Right, get a good look at the thermos. And then, so now the thermos should be in your visual cortex. Then see if you can close your eyes and still see the thermos in your head. Kinda? A little bit, right? At least get the idea. So that thermos, right, or here, the thermos is not such a great example because you don't know the thermos that well. Let's think about, how about the dinner table where you grew up, right? When you were a kid and you would eat dinner with your family at the dinner table.
Movies, kids at dinner.
Can you picture that in your head? You know what it looks like? Picture it really well, right? You can picture it probably with your eyes open or closed, right? You can see it. So that's, right, but you don't see it, so it's not all of this process that's happening. It's just this part, right? So you're seeing it, right, in your visual cortex. Feel me? Right? Are we clear? We don't need to get too caught up in this waking state or dream state. It's not limited to when you're dreaming, right? Dreaming is, in this case, the dream state is that state where you're seeing things in your visual cortex that do not correspond at that particular moment to things outside, right? So when you were just picturing the dining table from when you were a kid, you were doing that, right? So having a visual image of something that's not in front of you, right? So when you're looking at this marker right now, then that's waking state, right? It's all of these things happening. And then hopefully the thing that you see corresponds to the thing that I'm holding, right?
Crystal clear.
Lost, confused?
I am so confused right
Okay.
now.
I'm going to go over all of this again. But so waking state is when we are conscious of external objects. Dream state is when we are conscious of internal objects. But, you know, just to state the obvious, there are times when you might be awake, right? When you might look awake to other people, but your mind is somewhere else, right? Where you might be daydreaming, or you might be thinking about the rush party that you got to do later, right? Or you might be thinking about some, I don't know, other things that you'd rather be doing now, right? So you're like here and awake, but your mind is somewhere else. Happens, right? It's probably happened during this class. Or sometimes you just sit there and you're like, I don't know, couch lock or whatever.
The couch lock is strong on this one.
Just like, you know, like a hard indica, and just like nothing's happening, right? And like in the deep sleep state, but you're not asleep, right? We're just kind of like unaware of what's going on around you, even though you were awake, right? So all of these states can happen while you're awake, and yeah, all of them can happen when you're awake. Cool. Enlightenment, we're not going to worry about right now. Just know that there's another state, right, of awareness.
It's a state of total awareness.
Cool. Any questions? Yeah. 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 Yep. Daydreams, dream state. So state, you know, I mean, they're murky, right? It's not like a clear state, like I'm in this state or I'm not in this state. You can be awake and then also be in, dream state. Cool? All right. Now, you can probably notice, there's a lot of fours, in this whole chapter, right? And these more or less line up. So we can have the 4 states of consciousness. Enlightenment definitely lines up here. Deep sleep, I think, is off the chart. Waking and dream state can involve all of these, right? Well, dream state wouldn't include this, but it could definitely include these, right? You could be asleep and dreaming about my lecture or about a book that you read or something like that. You can dream about discussions and conversations, which would be rational. You can certainly dream images or memories or those kind of things. Cool? All right, then let's shift. That's the end of chapter 2, but it's a lot of chapter 3 also. Marijuana should be legal. Okay, it's not. I didn't even write that. It's not my writing. Chapter 3, no view from nowhere, previously just called Phenomenology. So phenomenology has a very long history. The practice of phenomenology has been around for a really long time, East and West. It wasn't always called that, but what Socrates did was phenomenology. Even though he never used that word, as far as I'm aware. This word is largely, it's associated with a lot of philosophers in the Western tradition, but most notably, perhaps, with this guy. My book is in pieces, but this book, simply called Ideas, the subtitle, A General Introduction to Pure Phenomenology by Edmund Husserl. Husserl was a philosopher in Germany. He died during around 1930, something like that, or yeah, I'm not sure exactly when. But that's gives you a rough time frame. Wrote that book right around the turn of the century, right around 1900, I believe. Basically, Husserl was just dissatisfied with a lot of philosophy. He thought that most philosophy was bullshit. He thought that philosophers were terrible, and that philosophy had just gone in all sorts of directions, and we're talking about things that didn't matter in the world, and talking in ways that just were not helpful. He just did not think very highly of philosophy or philosophers, and thought that we needed to be far more careful with our ways of doing philosophy, right? Take a more scientific approach to how, studying how do we know what we know, right? We thought that philosophers had gotten so disconnected from reality that what they were doing just really didn't help anybody. And so he wanted to bring philosophy back to core roots, thinking about how do we know what we know, the methods of perception, what happens, at a very literal level. All of this that I gave comes straight from Husserl, including the die, actually. So he uses an example of a playing die. This particular playing die, by the way, it's important for me that my kids have every advantage. So they, my kids already know all this stuff. And so my kids learned phenomenology from me years ago. My daughter knows that I use a die in class all the time. So she made me this. My daughter made this from scratch. She made me 6 of them. So it's just a regular playing die, right? But made it because I use it in class, and I use it in class because Edmund Husserl talks about playing die in this book, Ideas. In order to explain what is phenomenology. The most important aspect of phenomenology, I think, or at least to begin with, is we have to distinguish between the phenomenon and, in German, the Ding an sich, or the thing itself, right? Just that if I call it the thing itself, I do call it the thing itself, but it just sounds like I wasn't trying very hard when I came up with that phrase or something, right? The thing itself. But that's what Husserl called it, the thing itself. The Ding an sich, what's called the rallying cry of phenomenologists, is zu den Sachen selbst, to the things themselves. So anyway, so we've got to distinguish between the thing itself. So the thing itself basically is whatever thing we're trying to study, right? Whatever thing we're trying to study, right? It could be the brain, it could be psychology, it could be I don't know, tables, chair. It could be whatever. I don't know. It could be anything, right? Whatever thing we're trying to study. Let's put that at the center of the, could be a chemical compound or something, right? So we're going to put that at the, that's the thing that we're trying to study. Now I have to distinguish between the thing itself and the phenomenon. Now I've already done that for you. So in this example, this would be the thing itself, right? The thing that we're investigating, like in this case, like this actual die, right? Let's say this actual die, if we want to study it, then, you know, we want to see, how do we know what we know, right? How do we experience this thing itself? And then the phenomenon, right? Let me give you a clear definition of the word phenomenon that I will expect you to memorize. Phenomenon is that which appears to the conscious mind. Pretty simple definition, right? That which appears to the conscious mind. But don't get confused, right? There's the die, which is there. That's the sensual object. That's the object, the material thing over here, right? Which we experience sensually. But when we experience sensually, all these steps happen, right? The light bounces off of that thing, goes into your eyeballs, right? And then your eyeballs, through dendrites and electrical signals, recreate the phenomenon. So the phenomenon is here, right? So how many playing die are there? One. How many phenomena of the playing die are there in the room?
12.
Word. Yep. Because the phenomenon is where? Point to the phenomenon. Phenomenon is up here, right? That's where it is. So the thing itself, here, I know this is silly and stupid, and you're in college and you're grown-ups and stuff, but point to it, right? There's the thing itself. Good. There's the phenomenon. Cool? All right? Super clear?
That's super clearish.
So get to the exam. That won't be something you're confused about, right?
Perfectly not confusing.
Okay. So they're different, right? They're different. Howdy, y'all. 2023 Brad popping in here after like 80 hours of video editing. I decided that I wanted to insert this clip from 2021 that I recorded a couple of years ago when I was trying to use a green screen with, limited success, I'll admit. But I wanted to pop this in here for a couple of reasons. One, it's right about in the middle of this video. It'd be a good time to take a break. There's no commercial in this particular chapter, so if you need to take a break, then now would be a good time to hit pause before you watch this video and then the rest. There's not a lot of content in here that's not in the rest of the video, but it is a real quick, concise overview of phenomenology and the phenomenological method in a way that I think comes across quite clearly. Anyway, I think it might help some folks, and it's not going to hurt anybody to watch the phenomenological method one more time, because the phenomenological method is so central to everything we're doing in this class and is the number one thing that I want you to take away from this course. So without further ado, here's 2021 Brad. We're studying. You know what? Let's get a concrete example of what the hell we're talking about. I'm not going to pick an example at random, but instead use an example that was given by a scholar who's often called the father of phenomenology. His name is Edmund Husserl in this book called Ideas. So Husserl uses this example of a game die. So let's think about, I usually carry this game die around with me. This one's kind of a fun one. This one's a normal game die. But let's say we want to understand, we want to try and see this game die as it is, and to understand the distinction between the die as it is, as an entity, as a thing, and how that phenomenon appears to our consciousness as an object, as an object of consciousness. So how does this external physical thing appear to our consciousness, and how can we distinguish our idea of it from the thing itself? Of course, we all know what a die is, right? A die has 6 sides and flat faces and everything. That's part of the point of using the die, is because it's a simple, easy example with which we're already familiar. All right, so let's see. From one angle, it's going to look like a flat square with 3 dots. But from the opposite angle, right, it's going to look like a flat square with 4 dots, right? Because opposing sides of a regular playing die always total 7. But if you are seeing the number 3 and I'm seeing the number 4 and I'm asking you to report on your scientific observation of what you're seeing, then you're going to say, well, I see a square with 3 dots, and I'll say, well, I'll see a square with 4 dots, and that person over there will say, I see a square with 2 dots, and the person over there will say, I see a square with 5 dots, and the person from a particular angle will say, well, I don't actually see a square at all. It looks like something that's not quite square. All right, let's pause here and zoom in so we can understand what the hell this dude's talking about. So when seen from a 90-degree angle, each side of the die appears to our conscious mind as a square figure with some number of circles in it. But from a different angle, the same die appears to our conscious mind not as a square, but as a 6-sided polygon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Obviously, this person will see far more dots than the others. However, while some of the dots appear almost circular, most of them are actually stretched ovals, ellipses with 2 foci instead of a center. Now, to demonstrate, note that all of the red circles that I've added here are identical copies of one another. So what? Well, Husserl's point. So part of his point is that there are no shortcuts to understanding the truth of reality. A phenomenologist must carefully, clearly, and accurately describe what appears to his, her, their conscious mind, and must identify where they are coming from, and must listen to those around them. Only then can we actually know the thing itself, rather than the mental image of that thing, which is something created by the mind. So to summarize, phenomenology requires us to carefully describe precisely what our senses reveal to us, but also describe where we are coming from. This is called our perspectival starting point. In order to have a more accurate understanding of the real world as it is, then we must listen to the descriptions given by other humans, and we must consider where those other humans are coming from. What is his, her, their perspectival starting point? And I see multiple sides. So by getting as many different perspectives on the thing itself as possible, then we get a clearer, more accurate view of the thing itself. One of the things that this does is help us to distinguish between the object and our subjective experience of that object so that we can get a truer, more accurate sense of the thing itself. Now, obviously, it may be obvious, perhaps it's obvious, it could lead to some confusions, right? It could lead to some problems. If you are describing your phenomenological experience of the die and you say, well, I see a square with 3 sides, and I say, well, I see a square with 4 sides, we are both clearly correct, right? Even though our reports of the Ding an sich, the thing itself, are different, right? So then how do we resolve this confusion? Well, phenomenology says we shouldn't prima facie assume that you're right or that you're wrong or that I'm right or that I'm wrong. But nevertheless, we need to try and identify our perspectival starting point, right? If I understand that you're coming from over there and you understand that I'm coming from over here and this thing is in the middle, then clearly we are seeing different sides of the same thing, right? And then we can start to piece together our subjective reports of our phenomenological experience of the particular phenomenon, the thing itself, whatever it is at the center of the circle, and then we can say, all right, well, it's something that has 3 dots on one side, 4 dots on one side, 2 dots on another side, and clearly seems to have more than just the side that I'm seeing, but perhaps, I don't know, 6 sides. Now, the same move, philosophically, that helps us to overcome that perceived or potential problem of differing reports of a thing itself, also is the benefit of phenomenology. If we each describe what we see, but also identify our perspectival starting points, then we start to get a much more complete picture of the thing itself, right? Seeing this thing from all sides. Now, obviously in this course, we aren't studying playing die, right? As fun as that might be, but instead, we're going to study religion. So we're going to put ideas and concepts and more abstract, difficult things that we can't necessarily see But it's important to note that this phenomenological method can really be used to study just about anything. So I've defined phenomenon and being on sick. Any questions about those? Right, that's a clear definition of that. The thing itself is just whatever thing we're studying, right? Phenomenology of perception, cognition, that's what I did. I did them out of order, but that's what I did. Phenomenological method. Let's do this again. Let's go through this again before I get to the phenomenological method. Because I also need to get to understand this conscious perceiver. You probably already got it, but okay, let's see. So there's this thing that happens to me all the time. I'm a philosopher, and I'm pretty scatterbrained, and you probably noticed that, like today, if not before. And so my house, is pretty scatterbrained, and you can imagine, right? So I am always running behind, always losing my keys and everything, right? So I try to do this where I walk in the door to my house and walk in the kitchen door and put the keys on the counter by the back door, right? Try. There's actually like a huge pile of shit right there right now, so I barely can even put them there. But that's where I try to put them, right? So then that way when I'm running late for class or I'm running late for whatever, then, when I'm in a hurry, I know where my keys are, right? They should be right there by the back door. So I go get my keys and go. Half the time I forget to put them there, so if I'm running in a hurry or whatever, I go there and I look and I don't see my keys.
Where are my keys?
So then I get frustrated, start cursing at myself and everything. I run into the bedroom, look through all my pants pockets.
Where are my keys?
Can't find my keys. Go to the laundry room and start looking through the dryer.
Where's my keys? Where are my keys?
And everything, where are my keys? Where could they go, right?
Then they're right here, right?
I mean, they're not there. I get frustrated and decide that I'm just going to walk to Fitchburg State or whatever, because I can't find my keys and I can't leave without my keys. And I go in a moment of desperation and look back on the counter by the door, which is where they're supposed to be. And I look and guess what? They're right there, right there. They've been there the whole time. Does this ever happen to you? Yeah? Does this ever happen to you? Yeah? So anybody this hasn't happened to? How can that happen? Something wrong with your eyes? So let's think about what's happening, right? So you've got the keys, right? So instead of a playing die, in this case we've got the keys, which are there, right? They're there. I'll put them back. The keys, I'm probably going to forget them. But the keys which are there, right? Did my eyes see the keys? I mean, they're plain sight. They weren't under anything. They're right on the table. There's no way I could have looked there and not seen them with my eyes, right? Lights are on. Of course, if there's no light, then you can't see them. But if the lights are on, then the light bounces off of the thing, goes into your eyes. So, and as long as your eyes are working, was it a problem with my eyes? Is it a problem with your eyes when you don't see them? No. So what is the problem? Where is the problem happening? So say more. Yeah. Yeah. So my eyes are seeing them, but there's an eye that I am not seeing them, right? So there's my eyes, so we got to distinguish between my eyes, which are seeing them, and the eye, because I'm distracted or I'm not focused or I'm stressed or whatever, right? So I'm just not seeing. There's something wrong with that process, right? Like you said. So the process behind this, something is going on. The problem is not here. The problem is here, right? Cool? Nailed it.
Nailed it.
So then hopefully this helps us to recognize the distinction between the thing itself, in this case, keys, right? And then the phenomenon, which is, the mental image. Mental image is what I want. And then this I, right? So I am not seeing the keys, right? So there's kind of two seeings that's going on, right? When we use the word seeing, this is kind of stuff that drove Husserl crazy. It's people use words in all these different ways and they're really inconsistent, right? So when you say I see, what do you mean? Do you see with your eyes or do you see with your perceiver, with your eye? Not EYE, but eye, right? So you can see things with your eye. The eyes see the keys, and the keys, if everything's working right, produces this mental image of the keys in your brain, which is the phenomenon, the mental image, versus the sensible object. It's almost like this stuff lines up with what we were studying in the last chapter, didn't it? Right? So like the sensible object, the material thing, right, which is sensed through our sense organs, which then creates this image, which is in our heads, right? Which then we either see or don't see, right? If we're stressed, then maybe I see this or maybe I don't, right? Maybe, in fact, could it be, psychologists out there, could it be that I don't see them for the very reason that I'm stressed out because they might not be there, right? So I have this like expectation that they're not going to be there. And then so I look, my expectation is confirmed, even though they are there.
Confirmation bias?
Does that sound psychology? I think so. So then when I, look again later, then for some reason I see them. Want another example? Let's do another example. Everybody understand that example? It's another stock classic example. So let's say I'm at my farm, right? And it's late at night, dark night, and I gotta go out to the barn to feed the animals. I would never go out to the barn barefoot, but for the sake of this example, let's pretend I'm barefoot, right? Or you're outside in the dark, you're barefoot, you're walking through the grass, and all of a sudden you see a snake curled up right beside your foot. How would you react? Scream? Yeah. How else? Kick it? Yeah. And then don't know? Yeah, figure it out? Yeah. All right, so kick it or scream. What'd you say?
Run. Yeah.
Run, right? So that's literally fight or flight, right? So that's literally when you have this reaction, you see something, you enter, right? Is it sympathetic nervous system that kicks into action? I always get sympathetic and parasympathetic confused. But one of them is your fight or flight, right? Reflex, which sends you into a state of hypervigilance, which we talked about before when we were talking about different states of consciousness. And so when you're in that fight or flight, then you either kick it or you run, or you kick it and then run, right? Or something like that. Let's say you run, but you've got to go back for some reason. So you get a flashlight and you go and you're looking for the snake and you shine it on where the snake was and you realize it was just a rope or a garden hose, right? So it wasn't actually a snake at all, right? Make sense? What happened to the snake? It was never there, but did it exist? So it existed in your mind. It existed as a mental image. And that mental image was not only existed, but it was very real, right? It's so real that it caused a reaction. It caused this fight or flight reaction, right? It caused a biochemical reaction. So it was a cause, right, which caused... Right, yeah, I was going to talk about cause and effect in the Pramana section, but which caused this I to become scared and to enter into that right fight or flight mode or whatever. But the cause of that thing was something. Where did the snake come from? So the snake. Can we agree that the snake existed? But the snake existed not as a material, sensible object, but instead as an image, right? As an image in our head, a mental image, a mental object. Where did that mental object come from? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So then you're kind of bringing comparative relation too, right? So like you've seen this thing and you've seen something like this before. It looks like a snake. So you're like, all right, I've experienced a snake before. This looks like a snake. It's a snake.
It's not the same thing.
It is the same thing.
Right? Good. What were you going to say? Nice. Yeah. Awesome. Now, logically, we have to say that there's two causes, or different kinds of causes. We'll get to this later in the semester. But different kinds of causes. We've got sort of the material cause and the efficient cause. Other kinds of causes too. In this case, you didn't totally imagine the snake, right? There was actually something there. What was actually there? Rope, or the hose, or whatever, right? There was actually something there. And then so you see the rope, and then your mind creates the snake, right? But the snake isn't totally made up, right? So the efficient cause is the I, right? The I creates the snake. But the eyes, other spelling, right? Eyes, see the rope, right? We could say, as long as there's nothing wrong with your eyes, in this case, what's the problem? The problem isn't with your eyes, the problem is with the light, right? So there's not enough light. If you have more light, then you see the rope clearly. But because it's dark and you can't see really well in the dark, you see something, what you see is the rope, and then your brain says, "Ooh, I think it's a snake," run away, right? Or kick it, or both, right? Or if you have a shovel in your hand and you like hit it, and then you're like, damn, I just ruined my hose or rope or whatever. Cool? Makes sense? Able to distinguish between these three? There's going to be a fourth one later on, but these three are good. Now, in all of the examples that I've used so far, all of these have been sensible material things, right? And so if you're studying something sensible material, then you're going to use the phenomenological method, but scientists don't usually call it the phenomenological method. They usually just call it the scientific method, right? Scientific method is the phenomenological method, but applied to usually to physical things, right? Psychology may be a little bit different. Neuropsych's not different. Neuropsych is studying the brain, right? The material thing and that kind of stuff. If you're studying chemistry, then you're using all this process to study chemicals, right? And etc. Scientific method is a form of the phenomenological method. Could get in debates, all sorts of debates, which came first or whatever, but we don't need to worry about that. But the phenomenological method is this basically the same thing. The only difference, if it's a difference at all, is that we don't have to have a physical material thing here, right? The thing itself could be something else. It could be something like, it could be something like justice, right? So if we take justice and we want to say what is justice and have justice be the thing itself, right? So then how do we study justice? Then we're putting justice at the center of the circle. I haven't done phenomenological method. Let me just run through it real fast, because it basically is the method of your podcast. Yeah, we'll end on this. So phenomenological method has a few steps. Okay, here, phenomenological method. Step 0, draw a circle. We'll talk more about that later. Step 1, vaguely identify the thing itself. So what is this thing, right? The thing itself, X, whatever let's kind of like vaguely identify it. Vaguely, we'll come back to that later. Well, I'm going to come back to all this later. But vaguely, because if you clearly define the thing itself, then there's no reason to be studying it, right? You are studying something that you don't know, or you want to know, how do I know what I know about this thing? So you're going to start by saying, all right, what do we mean by justice or something like that? Well, let's just start with the word justice or whatever it is. Put that at the center of the circle. Start with the word, right? And then that's step 1. So vaguely identify the thing itself. Step 2 has 2 parts. Describe the phenomenon, and B, identify your perspectival starting point. So describe the phenomenon. Where is the phenomenon? Phenomenon's here, right? So X is not here. X is over there, right? So put this thing itself in the center. But then the phenomenon is right up here, right? So you're looking at it. What is that? So good at drawing. Should be an artist. You're looking at this thing, right? And the phenomena is up here. So you're going to describe how this thing appears in your conscious mind, not the thing itself, because you don't know. You're seeing this thing, or you've had experience with these things through comparative relation or that kind of stuff, whatever, right? But then you're going to describe what's in your head, right? And so this is literally what I want you to do in your podcast. I don't expect you to nail it on the first one. I'm just like super fast explaining it now, so don't stress about that. So you describe whatever thing it is that you're seeing, right? And you've got to identify your perspectival starting point. So basically, where are you coming from, right? If is looking at the die, where's my die? He's looking at the die and says, I see a square with 6 dots on it, right? And then looks at the die and says, I see a square with 1 dot on it. Who's right? Both, right? But then how do you make sense of that? Because they're both looking at the same thing. They're both calling it the same thing. But the account of the phenomenon is totally different than the account of the phenomenon, right? Or would say, I see a square with 3 dots on it. And I would say, I see a square with 4, because opposite sides total 7, right? So you have to describe the phenomenon, but you also have to describe where you're coming from. But hopefully you also understand this not only in case of the die, but also in terms of comparative relation. So you have these archetypes. So like, what is your experience with justice or whatever? And experience with justice is going to be different than experience of justice. It's going to be different than experience with justice. It's going to be different than their mine or anybody else's, right? So we've got to identify where we're coming from, what our experiences with that thing is, right? So those are 2 parts of step 2. And then step 3 also has 2 parts. Step 3 is just listen. Super important. Listen. A, listen to experts, people who know what they're talking about, and B, to neighbors. Step 3, listen. Listen to the experts, people like me, people who know what they're talking about, and neighbors, people around you, right? So you can get a better sense of the thing itself through that understanding our differing perspectival starting points. That's it. That's the whole phenomenological method. There's nothing more. We'll come back to it. Look forward to hearing your first podcast. Have fun with it. Chill, relax, it's all good. Just pick anything that we've covered, anything up till now, anything, pick anything in your notes. Talk specifically about it.